Welcome. That's the first important thing to say. We are organizing this session for the third time in 5 years. And we organize it together with Schiphol Airport and Slot Coordination Netherlands and, of course, the Ministry for Infrastructure. Thank you very much. The aim for this meeting is to give you more insight into how capacity at Schiphol is regulated by Slot Coordination and by Schiphol Airport. And actually today is a very special day, and in a negative sense. Because the Minister of Infrastructure has formally indicated our House of Representatives that he will continue the shrinkage of Schiphol Airport's port. So we go from 500,000 slots to 578,000. 74. I've seen all numbers the last month and the last years between 440 and 540. So mix it up sometimes. This makes this subject, the slot subject, politically and legally more sensitive than ever. And I do expect that today in the discussion we will see this back. For the program of today, we will start with the subject of agreements that are made between countries, the so-called air-level agreements and traffic rights. And this will be done by Jeroen Maurits. He's the first speaker today. Followed by Schiphol Airport, and they will explain more about how they determine their capacity in the capacity declaration. And the last subject we will discuss today is how this set number by Schiphol in the capacity declaration is allocated to the airlines by the slot coordinator. It's rather a full, maybe overloaded program, so I don't want to take too much of your time. But for now, it's really important to mention that we are making recordings of the presentations. You can share those recordings afterwards with colleagues, head offices. We will put them on our website. Also put some Dutch or English subtitles under it. If you have any question, we will give you a microphone so that we also can record the question. I'm not quite sure. I'm looking to the speakers. Questions after the presentation or during the presentation, or you can do it every moment you want to. And we are trying to do as much as possible in English today. If that doesn't work or is impractical, maybe we switch to Dutch for some moments. Sorry for that, but we will translate it in the. And if you do not want to be on the camera, please indicate it now or after the meeting. So, we find a solution. We'll go to the We'll find a solution. Blur your face or something, or cut your question out. We'll find a solution. Please let me know if you don't want to be on camera. And for now, I would like to give the floor to Jeroen Maurits. Jeroen works for the Ministry of Infrastructure and Waterstaat. Water Affairs or Management? Water Management. Yeah, that's what our king does. It's a national hobby of our.
Heb je de
Just first space.
space? Okay, that is this one. Yeah. Okay.
One per.
Oh yeah, thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeroen Maurits. I'm from the Ministry of Infrastructure and Waterworks. It is now, and I would like to give a presentation on traffic lights. I will also touch upon slots in the presentation. And also on the sensitivities of the BA procedure, because that is actual today, as Mart has said. So we'll come to that in the presentation itself. Wait, let me see. What I want to take you through is the system in which we do our bilateral system and how we negotiate and how this works, and also what the legal basis is. And the starting point is the Chicago Convention of 1944. And the basic article is sovereignty, which states that the contracting states recognize that every state has complete and exclusive sovereignty over the airspace above its territory. That basically means that only states are allowed to negotiate about traffic rights and not airlines, but on behalf of airlines, because other states will only accept states in negotiations. The system that has been worked out under Chicago is based on Articles 6 and 5, and 6 is scheduled air services. Basically, Article 6 states that no scheduled international air service may be operated over or into the territory of a contracting state except with special permission or other authorization of that state, and in accordance with the terms of such permission or authorization. It means you have to have permission of another state. It doesn't state how this permission should look, so it could also be even a call, technically, or an MOU. But in practice, what it has is evolved as an entire system of bilateral air service agreements between all states worldwide, and also in the last few years, EU agreements between the EU and other states. Article 5 is the other article on which services are based, and that is the right of non-scheduled flight. And that is permission for unscheduled, what we call charter services, to operate between two countries. And that is generally ruled by national law. So most member states or states have their own charter policies, which are separate from the bilateral system. In some cases, there are charter regimes within bilateral or EU agreements, but to a large extent, that's based on our bilateral approval on a sort of case-by-case basis, both for cargo and for passenger services. So Holland also has its own charter policy in force. That is the basis. What I'd like to take you through is what is a scheduled air service according to ICAO. That is a series of flights that possesses the following characteristics. Well, this is logical. It passes through the airspace over the territory of more than one state. It is performed by aircraft for the transport of passengers, mail, or cargo for remuneration. That's an old-fashioned term. And in such a manner that each flight is open to members of the public. That last is basically that you can buy a ticket under the system of Warsaw and Montreal. So it's not a closed flight. And it is operated so as to serve traffic between same 2 points, either according to a published timetable, or with flights so regular or frequent that they constitute a recognizably systematic series. Well, a normal example would be Singapore Airlines flying under our bilateral of Singapore, which has a schedule of, say, 7 flights a week. Then it falls under the category of a scheduled air service. For cargo services also, it would be a cargo service that goes basically year-round or all season round on a schedule, and normally under a bilateral or an EU agreement. Otherwise, it would be ad hoc series. That's the first part. And this is basically where we come in. When we negotiate with other countries, we try to achieve traffic rights for our airlines, for airlines that are vested in the Netherlands, EU airlines that are vested in the Netherlands. And under Chicago, you have 8 formally, but our negotiations are generally around the 3rd, 4th, and 5th freedom. And well, they speak for themselves largely, but third freedom is basically the right to allow, let's say, KLM to operate between Amsterdam and Tokyo and take passengers or cargo to Tokyo. The 4th is vice versa. That is that you can take passengers or cargo back from Tokyo to Amsterdam. And the 5th freedom, which is particularly interesting for the cargo industry, is the right to take on board or discharge traffic, that's passengers or cargo, on intermediate or beyond points on that route. So, for instance, the right to discharge traffic in Istanbul on a route from Amsterdam to Tokyo, or persons, and that can also be on beyond points. So, for instance, if you fly from Tokyo onwards, you can also achieve or negotiate on 5th freedom on points beyond Tokyo. So these are the main ones. Another one that's important is sixth freedom, but that's more the system of I think of big hub carriers to attract passengers from other hubs in the vicinity. So, for instance, generally speaking, if you buy a ticket from KLM from Amsterdam to Tokyo, it will be more expensive than a ticket via Frankfurt for people who fly from home, because the Lufthansa will try to attract you with lower fares if you fly via Frankfurt, and then you first fly a third and fourth to Frankfurt, and then you fly on to Tokyo. So that is it's not a traffic right that we negotiate normally, but it's a sort of combination of third and fourth freedoms on two routes. Okay. In these air service agreements, at the end, you will find route schedules, and these route schedules state routes you're allowed to fly. What you see here is an open route schedule. These are the ones we normally try to negotiate in sort of modern times. And if you take a standard one, you'll be allowed all points in state A. Let's say that's the Netherlands. So you'll be allowed to fly all points in the Netherlands, all intermediate points worldwide, basically. All paid points in state B, that is the country with which you have an air service agreement, and all points beyond. And then, of course, vice versa, the airline of the other side is allowed to do the same. It reciprocity the other way around. And then fifth freedom can be negotiated on intermediate and beyond points. In our very old air service agreements, we still had lists of intermediate points which you're allowed to fly. And in some cases, you had to negotiate basically on those intermediate points, and also lists of beyond points. But we try to evade that and open it up, and go for an open schedule, basically. Okay. This is highly technical, but this has been an issue since 2002 under our bilaterals. In the past, the entire system was based on nationality. That's national ownership and control of the airline that you designate under an air service agreement. So in our case, all our old bilaterals were based on national ownership and control of KLM, for instance. And that's majority ownership or substantial ownership. But in 2002, the Court of Justice ruled that that is contrary to EU law and to the freedom of establishment. And that was a sort of turnaround point in which we had to change our nationality clauses into EU clauses. So from that point on, both the EU and member states had to put EU ownership and control clauses in their air service agreements. But we still have a link with establishment. So you still have to be established in the Netherlands to be able to profit from our bilateral. So for instance, if Iberia would like to fly under a Dutch bilateral, it would have to establish itself in the Netherlands. And we are relatively strict on that. We demand that you have a standalone fleet here, a number of aircraft, you have management here, you operate standalone, you do not fly back to Spain. So you really have to be based at Schiphol to be allowed to fly under our system. So we now have only a limited number of aircraft, of airlines who fulfill these criteria. For instance, EasyJet is an example, KLM, TUI, Transavia. But other EU airlines do not. So they are not allowed to fly under our system. Also because we're afraid that could create free riders. That means that if you, for instance, if Iberia has a bilateral with China and the traffic rights are all fulfilled, then they could try to hop on our bilateral with China and say, we want to be designated by the Netherlands because there are still traffic rights available. And we block that basically because we do not allow that because it's not established in the Netherlands. And other member states do the same, although they all have varying establishment criteria. What happened after 2002 is that we now are trying to get all our air service agreements in conformity with EU law, which is we're almost there. And that these EU standard clauses have to be implemented by member states on the basis of an EU regulation, which sort of gives the rules on the EU level. The external policy also led to the European Commission being very active. And they have initialed, I think a lot more now, but at that time 50 horizontal agreements in which they got all the nationality clauses and changed them into 2 EU clauses without going for a full agreement. So for instance, they did a horizontal with Singapore in which in one stroke all our 27 member states, the nationality clauses are replaced by an EU clause. And they've also received after 2002 a number of what we call vertical mandates from member states, which means you're allowed to negotiate a complete air service agreement with a third country or a number of third countries. And famous ones are, of course, probably known: EU-US, EU-Canada, EU-Georgia, EU-Moldova. Well, there are a lot more: EU-Qatar, and a recent one is EU-ASEAN, which is, I think, the first block-to-block agreement between EU and a number of Asian member states. So that's one with more countries, and the Commission generally wants more of these in due course of time. This is just briefly how this works. When we do bilateral negotiations, we take our aviation sector, so the airlines that are interested from our side to go into a negotiation with a certain country. We can take Schiphol representatives, Maastricht representatives, and then we talk with a country, and we try to come to a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, or a record of discussions or agreed minutes, in which we try to arrange traffic rights for our side, and vice versa for the other side. These MOUs are between transport authorities, and they are linked to our air service agreements, but they are separate because we don't put these traffic rights in our air service agreements, because then when you have to change them, you have to go through the whole process of ratification again. So from a practical perspective, worldwide, we put them in MOUs, so that if you want a change in traffic rights, you only have to change the MOU. What we have to do under EU law is inform the Commission of the outcome of these negotiations, because the Commission wants to know if we have managed to get in EU clauses. And a famous example in which this has never worked is Russia, because Russia doesn't accept the EU clauses. So potentially all our agreements with Russia are an infringement of EU law because they still contain nationality clauses. Well, amendments of bilateral agreements are implemented through national ratification procedures, and those vary per country. In our case, you have to go through second and first chamber, and normally it's a silent procedure, but now we've noticed that this parliament is very interested in air service agreements and is asking a lot of questions, and is, in some cases, even breaking through the silent procedure, as with EU-ASEAN, because they have a lot of questions on why we do bilateral. So we're facing a lot of political questions on this system at this point in time. Just as a practical example, I've given a number of examples in which we have negotiated with other countries. This is not particularly a cargo one, but it was interesting for us because Suriname, of course, we have a special link with. And this was an MOU of 2004 in which we had single designation. Basically, only one airline was allowed to fly on our side and on their side, so SLM and KLM. And we tripled it at the time to triple. And at that time, Martinair, still operating passengers, tried to start operations from 2006 to 2008. But it turned out it wasn't viable enough, so they stopped those operations. This is a politically sensitive dossier, as we call it, because the people from Suriname who live in the Netherlands often complain that the tariffs are very high on the route, and that is, I think, partly due to the fact that they fly in summer and winter a lot, and then of course airlines tend to raise the tariffs because it's high season. So it's a difficult political discussion because the government's view on tariffs is basically that airlines are allowed to set themselves on a commercial basis, and you can only do something about tariffs if they are anti-competitive. So what we did at the time, we asked SEO, an independent organization, to do a report on the Suriname market and to test if the tariffs were too high. And at that time, they concluded that the tariffs were high in the peak seasons, but not extremely high. So basically allowed within the framework of competition law. This is another one, Vietnam. This was actually my first one, and this was at the time that we didn't have an EU-ASEAN agreement yet, so it was bilateral. And we, at that time, did a number of amendments on our air service agreement. We went from single to dual designation, so we were both allowed to assign 2 airlines. We liberated our tariffs regime. We put in a commercial activities regime, which allows airlines to co-share. We put new security and user charges and safety articles in, and we upped our frequencies from 3 to 7, and we opened the route schedule. So this was a sort of gradual liberalization. We were also involved in trying to attract Vietnam Airlines to the Netherlands, which in the end didn't work because at that time they were not interested. I think also Schiphol has tried a number of times to get Vietnam Airlines to Schiphol, but I think, well, I'm not sure now, but at that time at least they were more interested in London and in Paris. Yeah. Another one is Colombia, which we negotiated in 2012. We came to the most open regime of multiple designations, so where both sides are allowed to assign or to designate an unlimited number of airlines. And we came to an agreement on 9 frequencies for Pax Combi services, unlimited cargo services with 3rd to 6th freedom. So we even apparently managed 6th. An open code-share regime, open route schedule. And this was also interesting, and this is a sort of discussion we're in now, that the Colombian airlines or Colombian authorities don't have ownership control criteria. So in Colombia, anyone is allowed to own or control an airline that is designated by Colombia. And I think South America has that tendency because they have a lot of airlines in the same group. I think the LACA group, who are all open to investment from others. But in such cases, we really want guarantees that they are genuinely established in Colombia, so that it's not, for instance, a Brazilian airline flying under a Colombian air service agreement. Yes. Actually. Oh, okay. Some of them failed. We went to the Philippines in 2012 because KLM started operating on Manila indirectly due to the high fuel cost. It's one of their longest routes, I think, with Santiago. I think it's about 17 hours, and also that the Philippines asked for additional taxes. And so KLM asked us to negotiate 5th freedom on an intermediate point, Hong Kong or Taipei, so that they could sort of optimize their services. That basically means that you're allowed to get passengers on the stretch, in this case Taipei, Manila, because there's a lot of empty seats on these airlines otherwise, because KLM now is not allowed to do this. So when you fly to Taipei, a lot of people get out and then you still have open seats on the last stretch. That failed at the time because the Philippines were not interested, because that would, of course, be a distortion for their strong market between, in that case, Taipei and Manila, in which Paul operates and a number of Taiwanese airlines. We are now still negotiating with Taiwan on 5th freedom on these routes, which is also difficult because Taiwan has the same sort of viewpoint as the Philippines, that this is a market in which they don't allow others to compete easily. I know there's a lawyer from this case sitting in the room, so I'll be careful, but we also had a court case, which you are familiar. In the past, Lufthansa Cargo transported flowers from Colombia and Ecuador to the Netherlands via Puerto Rico, and they based it on the EU-US agreement. Our point of view was that this is not allowed, and that these operations were not covered by EU-US, but by bilateral agreements between the Netherlands, Colombia, and Ecuador. And we basically stated that Lufthansa Cargo was not established in the Netherlands according to our establishment criteria, and therefore is not allowed to operate these routes unless it would be designated under these bilaterals. And this led to a court case, in which, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that we won in first instance, and there was no appeal in this case, so it stopped there.
We had an appeal. It resulted in court appeal raising preliminary questions to be. Oh, das ist then. ACNL decided to don't.
Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah. Okay. And this is, I think, for the theme of today, and this is an important theme for us as well. Is there a link between slots and traffic rights? Our line of reasoning is that there's no link at all. What is for us difficult is that also in Dutch media, traffic rights and slots are often linked or often sort of not distinguished. So traffic rights are called slots or slots traffic rights, but basically slots are given out by the slot coordinator and traffic rights by us under the bilateral system. And there is no link. And I think that's easily explained because if there would be a link, then we would have a big problem because, of course, we have capacity, a maximum capacity at Schiphol. It doesn't matter at which level it is, or if it's 500, 600 or 800,000, because we have an unlimited number of traffic rights out there with 160 air service agreements, and we would never be able to accommodate all these airlines on the basis of the traffic rights that we give out. And this is the same system worldwide. So, for instance, London is a good example in which I think our colleagues from London give out very open air service agreements, a lot of traffic rights, but London is, of course, congested as well. So you always need a slot from the slot coordinator aside from traffic rights. And we've had battles on this, first with Russia in 2017-18. This was highly political. Airbus Cargo wanted to fly to Amsterdam in the winter season of 2017-18. And what the Russian authorities did was make a link between the slots that Airbus Cargo didn't get and our rights of overflight for KLM to their Asian network over the Siberian airspace. So we were basically forced at that time to make an agreement between KLM and Airbus Cargo to come sort of an operational agreement on slot usage for that winter season. Because if we didn't do that, then the Russian side threatened to pull out all our overflight rights. So it also had a lot of media attention. It was nasty, but in the end, I think KLM managed to come to an agreement, and we heard from KLM people that it was also a question that Airbus Cargo at that time didn't apply properly for the slots or too late. So I think they helped them to set this right in the future. But it was the first case in which we were blackmailed. The second one was blackmail. The second one was followed by the first one by Kalita in the winter season of 2018-19. And Kalita based it's on the alleged violation of the EU-US agreements with a request for sanctions against the Netherlands Schiphol and ACNL. We were allowed to give input to the DOT, the Department of Transport of the US. And we basically, again, our line of reasoning was there is no link between slots and traffic rights. And under EU-US, it's only a question of traffic rights. And I think at that time, DOT looked at this from a point of view of the discussions that were then going on solutions for freight at Schiphol. And at that time, I'm not sure what the status is now, but there was discussions in the CCN on a local rule on freight. I think it was local rule 1. And the DOT was accepted that could be a potential solution for freight, so this dismissed the case. And that finalizes this story with the latest developments. As you are all aware of, we are now in a situation in which there are EU sanctions against Russia based on a council regulation, A33/2014. And since February 2022, the invasion of Ukraine, our airspace is closed for Russian airlines and vice versa. This has led to a lot of discussions politically, because this basically means that airlines from Asia and a number of countries in the Middle East that are still allowed to fly over Russia because they don't have sanctions against Russia, of course, have a benefit because they can fly over Russian airspace and don't have to fly around Russian airspace to reach their Asian destinations. So it has also led to questions also from Parliament on how can we resolve this? This is not fair, basically. And the difficulty here is that we cannot sanction countries that do not have sanctions against Russia. So if we were to forbid, for instance, Chinese airlines to fly over Russia, we would have no legal basis to do so. And the fear would then be, which I think is a realistic fear, is that the Chinese side would immediately retaliate on KLM on all their operations to China, in this case to Shanghai and Beijing. So it's legally not possible, although we agree that it's not fair to stop this. But it's still a sensitive issue. And of course I think this will only resolve if you come to an agreement after a post-war scenario, in which you, again come to normalcy and come back to your normal bilateral agreements, which allow overflights again. The final, as touched upon by Mart, is the sensitive one, is the BA procedure. The latest news is indeed that today we heard that this number 478 is codified. From an air political point of view, this entire procedure has had a lot of repercussions for us because our unit immediately noticed, of course, that airlines wanted to retaliate and were forcefully opposed to the way in which this procedure was set out. So we've had a lot of threats from the US and from US carriers and still do, and also from our own airlines on the way in which this procedure was put forward by us. I think we're now in a situation, as you said, that there's at least a sort of clarity, but we will see what happens. Most likely airlines will appeal this because of the fact that the entire procedure was sensitive. So it's up to see what happens on this. But for us, it was detrimental because of the effects on our air political bilateral system. Finally, this is more practical information also for airlines who want to file requests for traffic rights. We have a traffic coordination unit called TRACON, in which you can file the things you want to fly from the Netherlands. And we're also open to questions anytime. We have a lot of discussions with airlines on what is allowed, and we're always open to see what's possible. So please feel free to contact us if you have any questions. That is it, basically.
Thank you very much.
Any questions? Okay, thanks. Thank you very much.
Next speaker. Schiphol Airport would be neat.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I suppose, I see my slides already. All right. Well, hello everyone. My name is Dennis and I'm here on behalf of Schiphol Airport, and I'm a capacity manager on the slots domain. So it's a general presentation on how slots work at Schiphol and how we declare our capacity. So I'm not really sure how the information or the background level on slots is for everyone here, but just please feel free to ask questions during the presentation if you have any. All right. So I'll talk something about the key principles of slot allocations in general for a level 3 airport. I'll explain how the capacity declaration at Schiphol works, say something about performance, and leave some time for questions. So I always like to start with this example and compare Schiphol to a restaurant. So this is basically what's going on. So we have this very popular restaurant, which is basically always full. There's a very high demand, and a lot of people are on the waiting list to eat at this restaurant. The problem is all airlines, customers in this example, want to eat here at the same time. There's no place, so there's a slot coordinator who balances the demand over the day. Problem is, we could have more flights, for instance, in the night. However, our neighbors don't like that, of course, because of the noise. So there's other constraints that we have to work with for this restaurant. All right. Some context for the number of slots that we have at Schiphol. This is a overview of how the slots are allocated. This was summer 25, so we have about 1,400 slots on average every day at Schiphol in the summer. In the winter, it's a little bit less. It's about 1,230. And you can see that there's a certain pattern for every day of the week. This is the total number of slots. But then if we look at how many cargo slots there are, it's a lot less. So before we saw about 1,400 a day, of which I think it's about 3-4% of those slots are actually cargo slots. Nevertheless, it's a very important segment for Schiphol, as it's a very crucial and important sector for the Netherlands. What we see though, this is the number of slots that are allocated at the start of the season. What we see at the end of the season is that it goes up. So for the cargo sector in particular, we see that during the season, the number of slots increase. And I will explain a little bit later how that happens. Well, an overview of the regulations. So where is this all from? It's from the slot allocation, but let's just skip over this for now. I want to go to the worldwide airport slot guide. Did I hear a question? No. I want to go to the worldwide airport slot guidelines because it sets really the guidelines that we all work with, and every nation has their own interpretation of the guidelines, but it really explains quite well how we do things at Schiphol. So this guideline, well, first of all, it defines an airport slot. The official definition is that an airport slot is a permission given by the coordinator for a planned operation to use the full airport infrastructure necessary to depart or arrive at a level 3 airport on a specific date and time. So it's date and time specific, and it's all based on block times. So when you actually are at the gate or leave the gate. Well, we have this system, so there's a very efficient declaration process, allocation, and we use the capacity in the most efficient way. It's very convenient, and it creates consistent schedules for airlines because you can have consistent schedules over the years that relatively stay the same. It's open, fair, transparent. Those are the key principles. It also creates opportunities for new airlines and balances that with the existing ones. And it enhances competitions as well. Well, I already mentioned it. Schiphol is a level 3 airport. We have 3 different levels defined in the WASG. The first one is a level 1 airport. It's not really busy. You don't need any coordination. All the demand basically fits. Then there's level 2 airports. Most of the US airports are level 2, for instance. They do have very tight moments in time during the season or maybe on a specific day, but in general, all the demand fits. And then there's a facilitator instead of a coordinator who balances the demand throughout the day. Level 3 airport, that's Rotterdam, Eindhoven, and Amsterdam for the Netherlands. That's basically an airport where the demand always exceeds the capacity. I have a figure here on the bottom where you see the demand per hour in the bars, capacity line. And you can see that the demand surpasses the capacity. There around 2-3 p.m. there's a gap, and the slot coordinator makes sure that the demand is spread over the capacity. So we use the capacity in an efficient way. This is what happens at Schiphol. And the demand line, that's basically the capacity declaration that the airport sets. We have this for a whole season, but also for days, but I'll come back to that in a few slides. Some important key principles for a level 3 airport are that, well, I already mentioned a couple of times, slots are allocated by the coordinator in an independent way. An airline must have a slot to either depart or arrive at Schiphol. You cannot do so without any, except for maybe emergency landings, but you need a slot for every flight. Airlines must not intentionally operate services at significantly different times than the slot allocated. Because, for instance, if we have this line and we need the airline to arrive at 1 p.m. because we gave them a slot there's capacity, they arrive an hour early or late, we might run into problems at the airport. So that leads to operational issues. So it's very important for airlines to stick to the flight that they've been assigned, or the time they've been assigned. Also, to not use the slot in a different way. So, for instance, you get a narrow body slot, but then we expect you to come with a narrow body flight with 200 passengers, or 180 passengers. But instead, you come with a wide body that has 300 passengers. You run into issues with the terminal. So it's also very important to use the slot as allocated. Slot series, I'll come back to that in the next slide. But those are very important because most slots are assigned in series. That means that you have approximately the same time at the same day of the week for a whole season. And also the historic slots, something you might have heard in the news a lot. We always talk about historic slots. They are always assigned in series. If you use 80% of your historic slots, you'll get the whole series again next year or next season. And slots can be transferred or swapped between airlines. So times can be changed, but you cannot buy them. For instance, London is very different though. In the UK, there's actually allowed to buy slots. In I think the whole EU it's not allowed, but definitely not Amsterdam. And then there's the task of the coordinator to monitor the use of slots if they are used according to what's been allocated. Going back to our restaurant example, Schiphol is the owner of the restaurant. They have to attempt to, place the coordination parameters, so to say. So what is the capacity that's defined by the airport? But there is a whole consultation cycle that happens for every season where we, together with the ministry, ACNL is always there, but also the airlines, we get to the definition of the coordination parameters, but Schiphol sets the capacity declaration. Regularly, the airport has to conduct a very thorough demand and capacity analysis to see if everything is still, if the capacity declared is still in line with the actual capacity. And the airport also has to enhance the capacity where necessary to meet the demand. That's not always possible, of course. Then there's the slot coordinator. They operate in a independent way. They assign all the slots, and they also, they track this whole 80-20 rule where they see if the series meet if the series at the historic baseline date meets the operational criteria. And they monitor the use of slots. Then there are airlines. Airlines must have a slot at Schiphol to operate there. They can only apply for slots you intend to operate. So you cannot just ask for 10 and hope for the best if you only intend to use one. Should also develop alternative plans if a slot is not available. But also important, review their own performance and identify corrective actions before the coordinator does so. So always review if the slots are still used as allocated. This is an example of how the series work and how the 80-20 rule works. So what you see here is this is a fictional example for a summer season. You see 7 days of the week and then about 30 weeks for the whole season. And you see there's, for this particular series, so often you can sort of see them for a flight number. You see that there are 210 slots assigned, which is 7 days, 30 weeks. That's at the start of the season. And then at the end of the season, the slot coordinator tracks how many of those slots were actually used. If at a day the 80% is met, then you'll get the whole series back the next equivalent season. And every day is evaluated independently. If for some reason the slot has not been used due to your own fault, airlines can apply for genus, which is justified non-use of slots, or force majeure. And there are a couple of reasons where mentioned here, where genus applies, for instance, strikes or extreme weather. There are also a lot of reasons that when genus does not apply, for instance, commercial reasons, your flight isn't booked fully or something like that. The slot coordinator, again, also determines whether or not genus applies. And then it might happen that a not used slot actually counts as used for the 80-20 rule.
Is the 80-20 rule only used for not used or also not operated on time?
It's only not used. Right? No?
Or operated on next day.
So if it's operated on the next day, it counts as not used.
80-20.
Not used on the...
So it has to be used on the same day. Thank you. Okay, so with this graph, I want to show how the cycle of consultation works at Schiphol. So first of all, we have this capacity line. This is set by the airport. And then we start with this historic baseline date. It's for the summer season, it's the end of January, and it's the end of August for the winter season. At that baseline day, we see all the allocated slots. They're usually allocated until the capacity line. And on top of that, there's a waiting list for slots that do not fit the capacity. Then in March, the season starts. And what we usually see during the season is that slots either get canceled or not used or given back to the slot pool. So during the season, this happens due to cancellations. what then happens is that some of the waiting list actually goes to ad hoc slots. So if you're on the waiting list, you might get slots if another airline decides to cancel theirs. During this process, slots are monitored, and also the airport reviews the capacity. So during this process, what's very interesting for freight, I think, is what we see is that the passenger slots usually decline after the historic baseline date because they get canceled. For instance, there's a storm and then KLM has to cancel 200 or 300 slots. What happens then is that on the waiting list, there are often a lot of freight airlines. You actually see those increase because of the cancellations that the passenger airlines make. Of course, there's also freight being decreased and there's passenger airlines getting slots. But in general, you see these trends if you separate the two segments. Well, then we continue. At the end of the season, the 80-20 rule is monitored. Usually, a lot of the series get their whole series back. Sometimes some series are not successful. Then in October for the summer, Schiphol has to declare the capacity declaration. And the airlines after that, they have their initial submission. So they usually ask all their historics back. Maybe sometimes anybody usually asks all their historics back. And there's also a lot of new submissions. Now, if it goes above the capacity line, now it's the coordinator's turn again to make sure that divide these equally or in a fair way. 50% usually goes to new entrants. And then whatever doesn't fit goes back to the wait list again. This is this is on the SAL slot allocation list. There's the first division of the slots for the next series. Airlines start to optimize their portfolio. There's a slot conference, for instance. And then again, we go back to January. We have a new historic baseline date, which is the snapshot, which will be used next season for the 80-20 rule. So this happens in a cycle for every season. And we also have that for the winter season. So it happens we have a cycle for the winter season and a cycle for the summer season separate.
Is there a reason why you give 50% to the new entrants first? Why don't you give the waitlist priority over the new entrants?
The new entrants are usually on the waitlist. So they come from the waitlist. But this is a rule from the WHSG, from the guidelines. So it's
mandatory.
EU regulation.
EU even. Oh, it's even EU regulation. Yeah.
No, I think what Dennis is trying to say is if there is availability within the capacity that is available before the SAO is sent, 50% of that capacity goes to new entrants and 50% goes to the remaining year rounds and otherwise the new requests.
And that means that although with the assignment of 50% to the new entrants, it's possible that already operating carriers remain on the waiting list.
I think it's good to mention as well that a new entrant is not necessarily a new airline. But Kadisha, can you help me? How many is
New entrant is actually, you should not have more than a certain amount of slots on a specific day. And also looking at route and also looking at the percentage of the total capacity that you already have of the available capacity in the airport.
Yeah.
So there are three.
Yeah, there are multiple allocation criteria. Yeah. And it's also good to mention that it's only the available slots, of course. So first the historic get allocated, and then if there's anything left, then 50% of that goes to new entrants. So only,
And that's a must.
at least 50%.
Question.
Yeah.
Can you receive ad hoc slots during season? Do you build up historic rights and those ad hoc slots? Yeah.
So you have to get your slots before the HPD, so before the snapshot is actually taken, to make them historic the next season.
This kind of seems to imply that there is around 80% of all slots that are granted again for the next season, and that leaves around 20% of the available capacity for the new engines and eventually these customers from the wait list. What are the actual ratios? Is it really a lot that is left?
No, for Schiphol it's very low. So this is not to scale at all. So for Schiphol, it's more than 99%. I would say that gets historic slots back, but it's different every season, and but the ratio is not like this.
Oh yeah, I expected it to be like very high, not this. So.
No, the slot pool is usually quite small. So, yeah. Okay, then how is capacity actually allocated? So here you have an example of a slot of an SSIM format, and this is basically all the information we have to declare the capacity in. Because what you see here is a flight number. That's the first part. A date, a time. Sorry, first date, and then there's the day of the week. So this is a Friday. That's what the 5 means. We have an aircraft type and a number of seats. 150 seats on a A319. We have the origin, and we have the type of flight. So it could be, for instance, a liner or a charter or a freight flight. That's basically all the information we have. The capacity we declare at Schiphol has to be some sort of, well, it has to originate from this information. So we can declare on number of seats. However, a seat can be occupied by a transfer passenger or an origin destination passenger. So which really use different types of infrastructure at the airport. They can come from a Schengen destination or a non-Schengen destination. So we can sort of deduct different capacity constraints at the airport from this. We always have to make a translation. Also, what's the load factor, for instance? So there is some gray area or it's always a sort of approximation of the capacity. An example of the capacity declaration then, this is the screenshot of the capacity declaration for this summer. What we have is a runway capacity. That's the broadest capacity almost. That is quite large if you count all the runway capacity that we have. However, we also have an environmental and an operational year capacity. That's what the 478 was about. Within the operational capacity is smaller than the runway capacity. Then within the operational capacity, there is a maximum number of flights that are allowed during the night. And there are other parameters such as, for instance, the border control or the wide body stand capacity, which are even smaller. So it's always the most constraining capacity that is leading. And we have all the different kinds of capacities in the capacity declaration. These are the examples. So what you see here is this is the runway capacity for the arrivals. So it's declared per 20 minutes and per 60 minutes. You have a total number of flights that Schiphol can handle on the arrival runways, I should say. As I mentioned, we have a yearly limit, a day and a night limit. Customs as well. That's how many flights the customs can handle from specific destinations. The wide body capacity, there's a lot of wide body demand at Schiphol, especially during the morning, but we only have 41 gates. So it all has to fit on those gates. And there's the border control, who can handle 123,000 non-Schengen seats. However, of course, they don't handle seats, so there's a load factor in there and transfers and so to say. But this is an approximation of the capacity of the daily capacity of the border control, so to say. All right. Is an example of how the brackets or how the runway brackets are allocated at Schiphol. What you can clearly see is on the top, that's the arrival slots. So we have the demand is the line. That's this bracket list, but then plotted out. And what you can see is that we have 2 arrival runways and then 1 departure runway, which switch back and forth. So we constantly are switching between 2 arrival and 1 departure runway and vice versa. And that switches throughout the day. So we have 3 runways in total. What you see also is that often, this is an average for 1 week, but often what we see is that in the afternoon there are slots available on the runway, whereas in the morning peak it's very full. I also plotted here where the cargo slots were in this for this week. So what I wanted to say that in the morning there's usually it's much harder to obtain slots than in the afternoon. Then something about the punctuality. As I said, we declare the capacity in 20-minute brackets. So, and in order for the system to work, it's very important, of course, that airlines use their slots as allocated. Because if everyone, as I showed you, wants to arrive in the morning, but they get their slot in the afternoon, they still arrive in the morning, we have a huge problem. So luckily, the slot coordinator monitors the use of slots, and I have an example here of freight performance, for instance, for the last summer. And it's a bit hard to read maybe, but these are the differences from the scheduled times and the actual times. So we see a sort of distribution arriving for the arrival on departure flights, where sometimes the flights are even 60 minutes early or 60 minutes late, and that of course disrupts the system. So now I have the stage here, so I'm saying to the cargo community, please arrive on time as well. So even though they use a vastly different infrastructure, of course, they don't use the passenger terminals, and they're still the same runway use. So for the system to work, everyone has to fly on time. And also, structural and intentional, those two words are important. This punctuality may also even lead to sanctioning, which of course nobody wants. I have one final slide. I don't know if there are any operators in the room, but we have a service at Schiphol that checks 3, 2, and 1 days in advance if the slot and the schedule time match. So there's a slot and there's a schedule in the operational system at Schiphol. If there's any mismatch there, you will get a warning message. So please, if you're not assigned or do not recognize these emails, make sure that you receive them. So we don't, we get at least the schedules and slots in line to prevent any dispunctuality issues or monitoring discrepancies. Well, thank you. That was it from my side. There's room for questions if anybody has some. All right. Thanks.
What correlate?
Just the space, right? Yes. Hello, my name is Khadija Habal.
My name is Alle Lunnemeyer.
I am the slot coordinator for Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. That's my main task. Additionally, I am also responsible for IT. So one of the big projects that I was working on lately is the migration to the new slot allocation system, which is SCORE and OCS, which will be in the presentation as well.
And my main task is slot coordination monitoring. So basically first point of contact if the performance is not in line with the elevated slots.
Okay, so the topics that we will be touching are, first of all, slot allocation, some functionalities that we have available. Alle will tell you a bit more about slot monitoring, and I will be explaining a bit more related to what is a slot. You had a lot of information from Dennis, but I will be touching another subject, which is the definition of a series. So there will be a new definition of series of historical rights. So I want to pay some attention to that, and also a short explanation of the reduction of the capacity at Schiphol. How will ACNL be handling that? In the slide, it's impact for the possible movement reduction. So I will be focusing on what would be the case. And eventually I will explain a bit on how can you as a cargo sector protect your historical rights. Okay?
Yep. So this is actually a sheet with either a QR code or a link to publicly available slot allocation statistics. I don't know if I'm able to show an example for winter 24. Okay. That's a pity, eh? Are you able to log in here, or I don't know what that's showing? Just your password. Password's over there.
That is my route accounts to give them the position.
Yeah. It's gonna be difficult, I'm afraid. I think it's the network that doesn't allow me to.
Yeah.
No, I think my organization doesn't allow me to log in on this network.
So maybe, I don't know if it's possible for you to scan the QR codes from this PowerPoint. So you can do so. And it's a nice feature. So basically for the left-hand side, it's for the IATA Winter 24 season. For the right-hand side, the actually current running Summer 25 season is the allocation statistics. With the slides, it's a Power BI slide. You can actually define what you would like to see. So there's a filter which allows you to filter out only the full freight carriers, or leave the filter out, or just select one particular airline. And of course, airport. You can select Amsterdam, Eindhoven, or Rotterdam, which are the coordinated airports, of course. It's hard to show you now on these screens. So I don't think it's helpful to show it on my phone. But it gives you an idea on actually how the allocated slots are currently allocated, and give an idea on possible availability of slots or not.
So the wait list, the allocated slots, but also what was cancelled compared to the previous month, to the HPD. You could also view the end of the season. So how did Winter 24 end as a season? So you have very detailed ways of getting as much information as you would like to have. So it's very transparent. And also for Summer 25, you could see what is still on the wait list, which part is from cargo, which is a passenger, and how does it, and also nice to see how does it how does it go month by month. So what is then the wait list? So you could also make your own calculations on how many slots are eventually allocated to cargo compared to passengers, etc.
Yeah, especially the last slide maybe is a nice one, which allows you to see the comparison between a chosen maybe milestone or week and the current week or the last week. So you can actually see, okay, my airline had 50 slots on HBD on this month, and at the end of the season we had 65 or less or whatever. So there's a comparison feature.
Okay.
So in general, slot monitoring and enforcement is done by ACNL, and we work together with the Dutch inspectorate, the Dutch CAA, the ILT. So we together made the slot enforcement code, and there it states what actually we do together with the Dutch CAA. So we monitor on the no-ops, no-recs. So no-ops is an allocated slot without an operation. The no-rec, vice versa, there's an operation and not an allocated slot. Unplanned night movements. So Schiphol Airport has a night period in place. If there's no allocated slot for that period, it's called an unplanned night movements. So we monitor it and we report them to the Dutch CAA. And then, as mentioned, currently ACNL monitors different time of operations quite intensively. And for Schiphol Airport, currently a 60-minute tolerance is in place on series, which is applied. So there's no difference between a short flight or a long-haul flight. So a 60-minute tolerance is in place. However, do note it's not on a single flight. It's based on a series of flights. And if there are 3 consecutive weeks outside the 60-minute tolerance, you might get information or an email from me or my colleague. Also a different way of operations, mainly for Eindhoven and Rotterdam, that's more important. In Amsterdam, it could be operating a wide body and a narrow body slot, or vice versa, or a freight operation on a passenger slot or whatever. Also in the coordination process, jumping the queue, capacity blocking, late handback and late retiming is taken into consideration and might have consequences with, for instance, a lower priority for next requests, slot requests. The slot enforcement code is, I think it published 2 or 3 years ago. So at this moment, version 2.0 is getting started to get ready, and most likely in the next CCN an update will be presented.
I think from this slide, what is important for us is the no-ops. If you do not operate and you do not cancel your slot, that slot is lost because we do not have the tools to reallocate a slot that was already allocated. So if you do not use your slot, please cancel it. And additionally, as Alle mentioned, late handback, late retime, etc., jumping the queue, capacity blocking, those are all things that we are taking into allocation. So we have the policy rule additional allocation criteria, where in step 2, we as the coordinator, if we have 2 similar requests, similar check marks, etc., we have to make a decision to whom we would allocate those slots. We take those into consideration, which also includes waitlist management. If you do not keep your waitlist updated, and if we allocate a slot and you decline the slot without a reason, that means your waitlist is not updated, which is very important for us because if we do get handback, we want to allocate it as soon as possible to the airlines that really need it. So if we allocate it to you based on a priority and you give it back to us, it's a waste of time. Most of the airlines are still waiting for allocation. So I want to point that out.
Just a quick question. Do you have a lot of historical slots for cargo carriers?
Well, the main problem here is that I mentioned it in a previous session as well. There are historical slots for cargo carriers, but what we notice is that cargo carriers, it's like a bucket where you have the slots for cargo, and we have added, for example, in a few seasons before HPD, quite some additional cargo slots. However, if the cargo airlines, they change it to the next day of operation or they delay the operation to the next day, those are all calculated against the percentage, which means that a lot of series in the last couple of years were lost by the cargo sector, which is a waste. So, and as we all know, new historical slots are very difficult at Amsterdam Airport.
So for instance, you stay to the next day, but it can also be based on more than 60 minutes. It is the same.
And well, more than 60 minutes is something that will be monitored. So my colleague Alle and his colleague Timo will have a look at it. So there's actually a whole process. So they will monitor what are you doing. Is this something that happens three weeks in a row? Then they will contact you. And there's an intervention ladder where you have to follow some steps. I think you will have some more information later. But that does not immediately impact your historical rights. For now.
No. Basically, once a slot is operated on the same day the slot is allocated, it counts towards the 80-20 rule. However, once the 60-minute tolerance is run frequently, let's say 3 times in a row, then we contact you and ask for an explanation. It could lead to sanctions, for instance, lower priorities for new requests for the next equivalent season. And at the end, it could lead to a withdrawal of the historic rights.
Yeah.
But that's a quite hard one. It's the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
So, next slide actually are a bit more explained NOVs, NOREX, unplanned night movement, court STT, court actual. These have links to website pages with more information. So it's good to know if the presentation will be shared, you can just click on the link. Here is also mentioned the court STT, which is a coordinated slot compared to the scheduled time. As mentioned by the airport, of course, it's most important that the airport and also your airline, your handler and all parties know and are able to plan according to the operation. So the reason for that is that coordinated times should always match the scheduled times in the airport information system. If not, you could get a message from us. And of course, the flight data validation service if you are a member of that. And court actual was already mentioned. Janus also mentioned from Schiphol Airport. I would like to elaborate a little bit more of one item which was mentioned is heavy weather, which could lead to Janus or force majeure. Basically, that is not the case. Only a very limited set of cases can result in Janus. And heavy weather in itself is not one of them. So only in case of a closure or partial closure of airport airspace, then this might lead to justification and force majeure. It's all based on the EU policy. Here again, some links to basically the policy rule from ACNL and also further guidelines which we follow for ACNL from AUATA. Some examples are there to have a look. Okay, can I apply for Janus? If you think your airline can apply for Janus, it's always it's your task to ask the coordinator for Janus. So the coordinator will not automatically say, okay, this was a day with possible Janus. Please, if there are any cases, contact us and we can have a look.
Yeah, so SI comment is not sufficient. What we often see is that an airline cancels a slot and they put we request Janus for. That does not apply as a Janus request. Yeah.
So here are some figures about not operated slots and slots without operations without a slot. So basically, the numbers are not too high. So in the past, the numbers were like 10 times higher. So that's a good thing. But eventually, it would be most helpful to have it 0 at both parties sides. So basically, in the summer 24 season, 150 of 138 actually non-operated slots and 67 operations without a slot, which in some cases could have been leveled out.
Yeah, and here you see, for example, KL on top, but bear in mind the number of operations of KLM compared to the number that are here. Yeah.
For winter 24, so basically it is a winter season, so less slots, less operations, so the numbers are a little bit less for information. Then also the unplanned night movements, showing that operations without having an allocated night slot at Schiphol Airport in summer 24 were about 1,027, I think, yep. And some reasons mentioned with high peaks in the week, then we know, okay, there was a weather issue or a Microsoft outage issue, which could have led to more night movements.
Misschien nog even dat IATA altijd wil dat je nog zoet houdt.
Winter 24. So, as of the start of the season, little weather issues. As of week 5, we see a major decrease in unplanned night movements, which is a good thing, of course. And at the end of the season, reach the same level as of previous season.
And what we saw in winter 24 is that normally during the season, the number of night slots is reduced, which leads into that night slots become available. However, in winter 24, this was not the case. So we ended up with an overbooking, so no night capacity. And we see the same trend for summer 25 now.
As mentioned, so there's an intervention ladder in place. So if something looks wrong, so we don't say it is wrong, it looks wrong. First thing we do is the prevention and dialogue phase. We get into contact with the airline and try to figure out what's happening and how the airline can solve the issues. If that doesn't work, we go to the next phase. It's the correction. And if that eventually does not work, finally the sanction phase will be in place, which could lead to several sanctions possibilities. So I made a presentation of actually performance of Schiphol Airport for the winter 24. And this is actually all operators. What is okay to see is the tolerances are in the top. The 60 minutes is the orange dotted line. And of course, it isn't an operational issues could lead into differentiation, so it's not a big deal. What's good to see is that the 6% or the average 6-minute delay of the inbound, and it's a 16-minute average delay of the outbound for the overall. And compared to the cargo, is that the operation is more different compared to the allocated slot. So an average delay of 14 minutes inbound and 25-minute outbound. So room for improvements.
Oh, that's me. Okay. So, as I mentioned before, in the last couple of months, I have only been working on migration to a new system, which is SCORE, which is successful. So we're happy with that. SCORE is a system which is mainly used by the most coordinators over the world. So it's quite a big software program. However, for the Dutch airports, we had special constraints which eventually led into more enhancing the system. We're still enhancing, but most of it now is done. So SCORE is now the main system for ACNL. We did the SHL in the old system, so we will transfer the SHL when the agreed historic deadline has passed, which is Thursday, tomorrow. We will transfer the SHLs into the new system, and then also start with the first initial submission and first SAL in the new system. So that's quite excited. The previous system was working with an online coordination portal, which is eAirport Slot. eAirport Slot is no longer supported for summer 25. It is still available for winter 24 view, because we always keep it open until the agreed historic deadline or the SAL has been passed. So it's still available just for view purposes. However, OCS is now the new online coordination portal. The link is in the bottom. It's also a place where you can find the information. Most airlines already have an account for OCS, but not everyone. So if you already have an account, you could request access via the OCS portal administration for the Dutch airports. They will first investigate if your account is still valid, and then they will send us an email to provide you with access to the online OCS portal. What is available now in OCS? You could review the runway availability without an account. So you could just go to that link and you can select Amsterdam, Eindhoven, or Rotterdam Airport, and you could get the information there based on for the runway. But with a paid account, unfortunately, it's paid and eAirport Slot was free. You could also do requests. Since it's quite new, we did not open it for the whole season. So we only opened the 72-hour scope, which is the operational period where most airlines, they need also out-of-hours service, which, because we're not in the office until not the whole day. So you could do your request through OCS. For that, you need an account. We are also working on providing the whole season, but since it's quite new, we just want to have some more experience ourselves before opening everything to the community. In the portal, you could also view your percentage. So you could see, how am I doing? Am I getting close to the 80%? Is my baseline still intact, etc. So it is interesting to see if you would like to have access, if you do not have access yet. Any questions about the portal or no? Okay. I was talking to Gert-Jan and I asked him, what kind of information does the sector want from us? Because I could tell everything about slots, but I'd rather have a set of questions. And I think the main question was, what is a series of slots? What is an ad hoc? And do I get historics or not? So I prepared just three lines. So all slots before HPD are historical. So if you get an offer from ACNL and you accept it, it will be eligible for historics. Let me just see. Yeah, so, and then the second one is, if you have historical slots, you have to make sure that you have them allocated in a series of at least 5 consecutive weeks. What we often see, unfortunately, even the last season, we saw that some airlines, they just have 1 or 2 single dates on the before HPD allocated. Those will vanish, because if it's not a series, our system will not recognize it. So it's a waste if you have single slots allocated for HPD. And then the next one is the one that hits cargo the most, is if you get slots from us after HPD, they will not become historic. So we do not allow the 20% cancellation before, 20% after. We do not accept new historical slots after HPD. So what we often see is that airlines, they have a wait list. We offer slots, and then they start asking, if I accept them, will I get historic rights? And the answer is no. And then they eventually return those slots. So I think it's good to bear in mind, even if it's a series, it will not become historic. Questions related to this?
So question.
Yes.
You can change a flight to different routes. Was it direct to historic?
If you change it to a different route, it will not break historic. Yeah. So the most important one is change to another day of the week. So if you have a slot on day 1, you change it to day 2. An ad hoc change, it will be lost because it counts against the percentage. Changing flight number, changing route, time, etc. will not impact the 80-20. However, if you change the series to a different time, it will end up with a different time on the SHL. So that's... Okay, so we have the challenge of the reduction of slots, but we also have a new one, which is a new definition of series and determination of historic rights. This topic was also touched before in the CCN. And I just want to draw a bit more attention to it because it's quite important. As of winter 24, so after the SAO has been sent out, before HPD, all slots must be allocated in series. But what does that mean for us? There are two changes to that. One is that a series of slot should be at least 5 weeks, of course. But if you have 2 series, 2 at different times, you cannot have more than 59 minutes between the 2 parts of the series. Otherwise, you will get 2 calculations of your 80-20. So they have to be. There cannot be more than 59 minutes in between them. So that's a change. Also, if you have an ad hoc change in the season, it cannot be more than 4 hours, so 239 minutes of the allocated HPD time. Otherwise, it will count against your 80-20. So that's a change compared to how it works now. That's quite important for cargo, because changing to making an ad hoc change outside of those 4 hours will hit your series. Yeah.
Is that also if you would say a couple of weeks in advance?
Even if you do it a couple of weeks in advance, yeah.
ad hoc changes.
Yeah,
So
it's ad hoc. So single dates. So let's say you have a series of 30, you change one slot. Let's say you have 8, you change it to 2 in the afternoon. That particular slot will be counted against your 80/20. If you do that more than 5, 6 times, you will lose your series.
Is there a specially good basis for these changes, or is it's crashing of the slots coordinator in general?
So actually, in the WASG, there's it says that a series needs to be approximately the same time, and that's the base for this. So there's the EU, they decided to harmonize and decide on how to handle this particular article, and this is the outcome. Each coordinator has the right to select what time they see as approximately the same time. 59 minutes is the average that is used, and the 239 minutes for ad hoc changes is quite large as we're using it. Normally it's very narrow, and most of the coordinates, they have 59 minutes also for the ad hoc change. Yeah.
So it will become 239 minutes. When was now?
The same day of operation. Yeah. Yeah, so that's a big change. Yeah. And so I actually noted a few important points. Make sure all slots are allocated in at least a series of 5 weeks. Series allocated at more than 59 minutes apart from each other are seen as 2 separate series. Ad hoc changes, as I mentioned before, will count against the 80/20. And this is quite new. So after the SAO has been sent out, of course, it's your own responsibility to check your program, but we are also available to look at the program together with all the airlines to see how can we help, what are your challenges, is there any improvement. So there is room for meetings. You could just request a meeting with me or my colleague, and we will try to help out as much as possible.
Is this rule is this the same across different countries, or is this specific here to ASEAN?
This is the EU, so it's a harmonized European rule.
So it's changing every year.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there are some countries that decided not to follow the rule, but most of the coordinators are. So, and also the time when they will start. So for us, it's effective as of the winter 25. However, there are some coordinates that will do it summer 26 or later, or already started. Yeah.
And there are airports who do not have slots.
I'm sorry? Airports that do not have slots?
Not coordinated airports. Yeah, then they do not.
They will not follow us. Yeah. So these are a few examples. On our website, you could find a whole working a policy rule explaining everything in detail. These are some examples on how the calculation is done. So, for example, the first one is 31 weeks. So, user to lose it is over 31 weeks. The second one is with a gap, but still the same time. Calculation is for both periods as one, so it's 30 weeks. Then the other one is with an interruption of 5 weeks, but still calculated as one series, since it's the same time. In this second example, you have a different situation. You see a gap of 3, a gap of 2, and in the middle 5, and then 13 weeks. So that's why I also mentioned, please make sure that everything is at least 5 weeks, because the 2 parts of 3 and 2 will be lost. So those will not end up on Miyasichao. So even if they're on the same time, which was previously was the case that they would end up on Miyasichao, but based on this new definition, those are lost. So the calculation will, the HPD will be only 18 weeks in the example. And then here, the example below, we see if the time is more than 15,000 minutes away, it's seen as 2 different series. So one of 6 weeks and one 24 weeks. So the calculation will be separate from each other. And then the example below, the 3 and the 2 will be lost. So it will be a remaining series of 24 weeks. This is why we want to pay attention also between the SAL and the HPD to avoid happening such a case as the latest one. And then in the presentation, I have added actually the policy rule and also the definition as written by the EU ACA. So please review those carefully. Okay. So I mentioned impact of the possible movement reduction for Amsterdam, but as you all know, there was some publicity today that it will take place. So what will happen to the cargo community? That's what I tried to describe in this slide. So in principle, the historical slots for the full freighter carrier will not be affected. It's actually the group of airlines that are holding the 80% of the slot portfolio that are that will be contacted with a task to reduce. It's a group of 10 airlines, so the cargo sector will not be affected. All the slots that are returned before the HPD will be reduced, so there will be no new allocation before HPD. So that's bad news, but that's sadly the outcome, because all slots that will be returned will be reduced from the movement limit that is set of 478. How will we handle the allocation as of after HPD? What we have done the last couple of seasons is that we have the new entrant year round. We have the year round. We have some priorities that should get slots allocated. However, getting close to the season, we see that many cargo carriers are still on the wait list. We also have some passenger series which are full season. However, they still need time to start their operation. So what we try to do is we're trying to use the Article 8.7 out of the EU slot regulation, where we say slot request on short notice allocation to support the airlines that are getting close to start of their operations to get a slot. So what is the process for winter 25? So this is only winter 25. We do not know what will happen in summer 2086. If there is any handback, so if there is any slot pool, a third of the slot pool will be used to accommodate the slot request on short notice. The other 2/3 of the slot pool will be used to clear the overbooking of the movement limit. So that is also, of course, going to affect the cargo community, because from 100% availability now, only 33% will be allocated to the cargo sector or other airlines.
Yeah, one question. In the second bullet, it's mentioned that no slots will be reallocated when they are returned before HPD.
Yeah.
And in the last bullet, it says that they will be reallocated for a third.
After HPD.
Oh yeah, of course. Oh yeah. And then there's a difference for the night, but I think you will probably address that.
So the night is there's also a reduction in the night, which will only hit 2 airlines for winter 25 that will need to reduce in the night capacity. But actually, that's the same process as before. If there is no night slot available, you will not get a slot allocated. We have the same situation now, actually, because the night is always overbooked. So we will reduce the night. If a night slot is returned, it's reduced from the overbooking. So as I mentioned before, in winter 24, there were no night slots available because it was still overbooked at the end of the season. We see the same trend in summer 25. The expectation that it's going to be a bit more difficult even in winter 25 with this special reduction.
And slots returned before and after HPD at night.
Because it's already overbooked. Yeah. And also change from night to day. It's also reduced from the capacity. Yeah. Okay. So we all know the calendar of IATA activities. Dennis pointed out the steps as well. What I'm trying to focus here on what is important for you to know. Also, what we noticed in the last couple of years. Please check your SHL, which is sent by ACNL. We often get airlines that are not checking the SHL. They send in a submission and then eventually they, after the SAL is being sent, they say, hey, I'm missing this historical slot. Where is it? Actually, the time then has passed. We have agreed historic deadline, which is for winter 24, winter 25 tomorrow. After that deadline, there is no further discussion on claiming any historics which is lost because of a genus request or and then what we also saw sorry,
I have one more question about the 1/3 that will be returned to on an ad hoc basis.
Yeah.
Of course, there are worries within the cargo community about that there will be less available or that it cannot be used. And one of the things that we've been discussing is the role of ACNL in monitoring that. So we were wondering what could you do in that respect to help us to investigate how many of those of that 1/3 is actually being used by the cargo community.
Well, that's difficult to say because we look at, as I mentioned, we have additional allocation criteria rules. So we have a whole process in how we allocate new, available slots to the outstanding requests. As I mentioned before, how can I go back? Yeah, here. So the slot requests on short notice, that's actually where we see that we could help out the cargo community. Why? Because getting close to start of the season, passenger airlines, most of the time they optimize their waitlist. They remove the parts that they could not start their operation because they have a lead time to start their operation. So what we see is that often it's cargo airlines that are still waitlisted. Let's say, I think I had some calls in the past that 4 days before start of season, I get a call, hey, I'm still waiting and I need it for 4 days from now. So we see that short notice requests are often by cargo carriers. You cannot investigate because I cannot investigate it yet because I am depending on handback from other airlines. So that's the main.
I think what we're looking for is maybe some assistance in monitoring next year, so throughout the season, so that we get our hands on the statistics, basically. That we see, because the 1/3 will of course be according to the general rules. So it's not only cargo that can apply.
Yeah.
But there is an expectation that a lot of it will be used by cargo, but we do not know for sure, and we are very scared that there will be limited capacity. So we are scared that cargo will be hit disproportionately hard, unfortunately, by the new system.
I think everyone will be hit because now we are forced to use 2/3 of the slot pool handbag to make sure that the exceeding of the movement limit is not reached. So it's not only the cargo community; it's the passenger flights as well. Because if we only have 1/3 of what we normally have, 100%, it's a big hit for everyone. And I think I think it's very difficult to monitor now because it's new. But I think the statistics that Alle shared will give you, and they're updated every Monday, will give you the tools to at least track or try to analyze the process.
Well, yeah, maybe there's at this moment I don't think there's a way to monitor the idea to protect the cargo sector. Maybe what the cargo sector itself could do is see, for instance, the priorities, how to request slots. Do note that if a request is made for instance, a new entrant, it's not only gaining priority. Of course, there's also a limitation. So you cannot change a route, for instance. But if there are possibilities to request your slots with a high priority, of course, then you are maybe more in control yourself.
Yeah.
So that's one way, maybe, to set yourself on a high priority on the waitlist. That's maybe one good thing to add.
Going back to this, I think last slide. So check your SHL. Make sure that if you see that you're missing slots which are returned with the U, check why are they returned with the U. Is there a reason why we had to cancel slot, which falls under the genus possibilities? But also what we noticed lately is that airlines, they fail to request their historical slots and they say, but I acknowledged it. That is not sufficient. You do need to acknowledge receipt of the SHL, but you also need to request your historical slots back. And then the HBD, that's a very important reference, because then the calculation starts. So make sure that everything is in series of at least 5 weeks to avoid losing even a single slot. Another one, which is bold. I made it bold because what we often see is we have in the WASG, it says the coordinator will ask the airline if the waitlist is still accurate. So we ask your confirmation that your waitlist is still accurate, or at least updated accordingly. This is done a few days, a week before the series return deadline. If you do not reply, we remove the waitlist, which gives you a lower priority. So it's very important that you take that back to your team. Make sure that if ACNL requests to confirm your waitlist, to do so or update it accordingly, and still send an email to confirm that the waitlist is updated. Many airlines lose their priority because you lose your priority of your initial submission, so the priority that you have as of the SAL. Monitor your actuals. So as I mentioned before, in OCS you could see your percentage, but also pay some attention to the messages that we send, because not only do we provide you with the possibility to see the percentages, we also include a comment in the SI of your message saying this request will bring your series close to the 80% or even below. So the warn message is a warning saying, hey, look out, you're getting close to the 80. And when it's done, you will get a message saying you failed your 80%. So this slot in principle will be lost. Of course, you then have the opportunity to contact us and to see whether there's anything you could do to make sure that you still operate. And then the next one, which is bold and also important, but also mentioned before, if you change your slot to the next day, it counts against your percentage, which I, as the coordinator of Schiphol Airport, see very often with the cargo sector. That was it, actually.
Any questions?
Any questions?
Just curious. Listening to Dennis' story from Schiphol and Bur's story, where does both responsibilities connect or are separate from each other?
You mean based on monitoring or slot allocation?
And your slot allocation, and then you mentioned a lot about Schiphol and slots and whatever.
Yeah.
Any overlapping or really influence with boss?
Actually, no. Schiphol declares the capacity, they provide us with a capacity declaration, and from then on, we are responsible for the allocation based on the and historics, additional allocation criteria, action codes or priorities. And Schiphol is no longer involved in that process. They are not involved in who has an SHL, what are the numbers of the SHL. They do not get that information. So it's actually a piece of paper, the capacity declaration that they provide to ACNL. And from then on, it's our task to do so. What you do on monitoring is the flight validation services. Actually, if the schedule is not equal to the slot allocated, you request 3 days in advance. You send an email 3 days in advance to an airline. That's their part, pre-ops, so pre-monitoring, and we do monitoring after the operation based on what the actual.
And of course, we have regular meetings with each other. If they have a problem, they can address it to the coordinator, which is also WASG described, and the other way around.
I was also asking a little bit on last year when there were some expected challenges in summer season. Are there airlines maybe that are willing to change some of the slots on our very peak periods arrival? And good question. If we are available to do it, what can we, let's say, get back there for something else? No, nothing, because that's ACNL responsibilities. So it was like, okay, we want something, but then again, it's ACNL deciding everything.
Yes. So the discussions you have with the airport are not discussions we are involved in. So if you come to us, it's a question from you, not from the airport. So that's the big line. Yeah. That's our independent role. So yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
Sorry.
Yes. You said that airlines start fragmenting their slots because you could fragment them in five weeks, right? Sections of 5 weeks, kind of to hedge against them losing instead of a whole season, they lose only 5 weeks.
You mean because of the new definition? Or? So the new definition, there must be one contacting part. So you could not do 5 weeks and then make the other one within the hour, then within the hour, then that does not work. So it's one connecting part that should be within all 60 minutes, 59 minutes. Is that this? Okay.
Yeah, but it's all the same. If you don't make any changes to the time.
No, as I mentioned, if you have 5 weeks, they are calculated as one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I missed that, I guess.
Yeah.
Hier nog een. The 80%, that's a dictated level. It's written?
It's written. Yes, I think paper, but
But in 1995 was paper. This is a EU regulation.
So usually that means basically you talk to nobody, because it's fixed. It's not like we make 60% available as a rule for cargo.
no, no, it's one, and I know that in the COVID period we had different percentages. Yes. Yes, I think it was 25, 64. So that no, 80% is so the 20% is actually space for an airline to say, okay, wait, I have a Christmas week that I want to cancel, that I have to cancel. One operation that is a couple of slots space to make sure that you do not lose your rights.
On the 478, it's per annum, which is now, let's say, the guideline or the target from government. What is the latest 12 months number which we have available?
Get it by the hand?
No? Maybe Dennis, do you know it by heart? Or
I can't remember where you come from.
So the actual operated vliegbewegingen.
Summer 24, 178, are we way over it on actual? The 2034 was 474 RT.
Yeah. And we were a little bit below the 478 last year, but in actuals.
Okay, then I'm from an handler, so I present a certain amount of airlines. Of course, basically, we should not talk Yeah,
exactly.
basically, you talk to the airlines only, as you've stated a couple of times.
Yes.
The
Who invited you? Giving.
on the slots topic itself, usually during the year, there is not too much issue. Only on 2 months, there is always an issue. It's April where it's an issue, and it's November also where it's the issue. There's always the stress in advance.
That's the start of the season.
Always the start of the season. So, for instance, in winter 24, so last winter, basically we saw that there was stress starting from the 1st of November, and all of a sudden there was this famous announcement where all of a sudden in December, first week of December, second week of December, slots were available. Basically, waiting list was clear, slots were available. The experience which we had this year for the summer 25 was that in the last week of March, still certain cargo carriers were waiting for the confirmation of their slots on frequencies which they did already operate in the summer before and also in the winter before. They were not yet approved, they were on the waiting list. They had to divert to another airport during the first week and a half of April. And all of a sudden, in the second half week, or the third week of April, they were entitled to come back. So I think what I understood from Dennis, I understand the difference is there. So basically for cargo, customs not applicable, military police not applicable, the terminal, it's all not applicable. Yeah, so I guess from an operational perspective, there is more possibilities there for cargoes. But we need to understand that especially at the cargo carriers as well, it's not like there are aircrafts sitting somewhere waiting for us in the Netherlands to say, okay, you're now welcome. Same, of course, applies for crew planning, network planning. Whereby I just don't get it, that for instance, on this year, 4 or 5 frequencies are diverted to another airport, and then in the second leap, all of a sudden, they are able to return. And this is an operation which was already there. It was an existing operation. So how can we avoid this constant stress which already operating carriers with operating frequencies have in the end of March, beginning of April, and the same applies to the winter.
So first of all, those airlines that have been operated in winter and summer before, they were operating on a non-historic base. So those slots were not allocated on a historic base. That's why they did not get them for the winter or for the summer 25 season now. So they will have to wait for capacity to become available. We have to wait. It's my workflow, yes.
Me just.
Maybe somebody asked you for the slot.
So, and then the next thing is we need to wait for capacity to become available. Yep. So an airline needs to cancel its operation in order for us to be able to accommodate the outstanding request. And what you often see is getting close to the start of the season, airlines start to cancel their slots that they could not operate, weather, etc. So we cannot allocate a slot which is not in the pool.
That's why I was more or less a little bit surprised that there is a mandatory requirement to allocate 50% to new entries, while actually operating carriers are on the wait list.
All the slots are on the wait list. So an airline requested a slot with a priority action code. So let's say even a cargo carrier, as Alle mentioned a few minutes ago, he said you could investigate if you could request a slot with a priority code, which is new entrant. If you do not have more than a certain amount of slots on a specific day, you could request new entrant. If you operate year-round, you could request a year-round, which gives you higher priority for the other part of the 50% of the pool. So there are possibilities to request with a priority, and 50% will go to new entrant. That's the EU regulation, so no change, no discussion about that. And the other 50% will be year-round, and then new requests. So year-round also has a priority. However, the airlines need to be aware of that possibility. So,
And maybe that's the question as well. Do you feel from ACNL that there is a lot of unknown at carriers, which of course are not based here, of how they should proceed in their application and how they should handle personal slots?
So we did pay some attention to it in the previous session. We could pay attention to it again. We pay attention to it in the IATA slot conference. If we speak to an airline, we say, do you investigate the possibility to request a slot with a priority? We do not advise what to do because we cannot advise each airline which priority they could use. It's actually the homework of an airline itself to investigate what can I do to gain priority. So.
No, but it's more your experience, what you feel.
What I feel is that the cargo sector, not only cargo sector, but also other airlines, they most of the time are not aware of the full possibilities. Possibilities, yeah.
Potential improvement. Yeah.
Do you feel that 3% of their cargo industry, 3% with better source cargo? Is that
I am in Switzerland. I'm not gonna comment that.
Right?
And are your analysts concerned that maybe some carriers choose another aircraft because of all this practical complexity? Maybe Ian Way.
I think no comment still. Yes.
Just the statement of the CEO of Liège is Schiphol Airport is my best and most cheapest marketeer ever.
Any other questions?
There's just a very precious question. When you mentioned we will now only take into account series of slots of at least 5 weeks. And did you do an analysis of current historic series of that are most durable less than 5 weeks that would be suffering from the change of view?
So actually, that's already the rule. On HPD, you need at least 5 weeks to build historics. What we will do, as mentioned before, between the SAL and the HPD, we have the possibility to speak to airlines. Of course, we'll investigate ourselves, but it's also the homework of each airline to make sure that everything is in series of at least 5. Yeah, but you're free to contact me as a coordinator of Schiphol to look at your portfolio. We could schedule a meeting. You could come over to our office, and we can just go through the whole program. So feel free to do so. I think that's the last thing. Questions, please contact us. Because only then we can help. Yeah.
I think that's a nice
closure.
Thank you very much to you as the participants of this meeting. Thank you very much to all our speakers, Kadisha, Alle, Jeroen, Dennis. Thank you very much. A special thank you to Gert-Jan, who organized this meeting. He's our slot expert at ACN. So if you have any questions, you can contact ACNL. And if it doesn't work, contact not too much, so not every day, but if you have really questions about or practicality you want to know, you can always at least try to contact Gert-Jan. He's quite busy with all your questions. Are there any learnings of today we made and you want to share with the whole group? Things you learned?
restaurant is the snow?
But what we learn, Maarten, is not. It's a lot of things which we know. Yeah. Now, of course, I understand, especially the new system, which will come in place with ACNL tomorrow. We know, at least the confirmation is there, that a lot of airlines are still not aware of how they should proceed. Yeah, and that's why we organize things like this, so they don't show up. I think overall, I fully respect the statement of indeed no comment. Yeah, you need to be neutral. You are Switzerland in this case. Yeah, that's of course what we understand. The concern of the community economically remains there. yeah, it remains the sponsor. Yeah, and of course, I think I made the remark a couple of times, but keep in mind, yeah, at this moment, yeah, of course, slots has something to do with the total amount of availability operationally. That's what explained by Dennis. Also, it has to do with the fact that we have a certain environmental responsibility, yeah, noise, CO2, etc. Currently, every single day, 100 trucks go to Liège empty, and they come back in full, and they are not electric. It's all diesel.
Yes.
100 a day.
Everyone, let me help the other you do. In 2 weeks, we will organize a meeting together with the ministry. Let's discuss this.
Yeah.
To discuss this issue. Is there room for air cargo in the Netherlands? Is there enough room? What we will do, we will share all the PowerPoints of the speakers of today with you as soon as possible. We have the recordings of this meeting, and we will share this with you. We will put it on our website, and we will share it with the airlines, because, well, as we saw, something goes wrong between, they don't have all the information they need, of all the knowledge they need. So we will share this information with them if they want or not. Then this is the end of this meeting. Again, thank you very much for participating. Yes, we will share the PowerPoint. Yes, as soon as possible. Yes, okay.